All right, well, welcome to English 1120, our Introduction to Grammar course. This video focuses on interrogative noun clauses. So previously, we looked at both interrogatives in terms of WH questions, but we also looked at that nominal clauses. Here we'll look at interrogatives as they function in nominal clauses. So we'll review what an interrogative is, we'll compare it with that now nominal clauses, and then we'll talk about how we may be able to delete phrases from dependent clauses. Let's first talk about interrogatives. Here's the interrogatives that we've used before: the who, whom, what, which, whose, where, why, when, and how. We've seen these before, twice before. Think about the two situations where we've encountered them in our grammar course. First was when we did WH question formation. And the second, we encountered some of them when we dealt with relative clauses. Remember, relative clauses function adjectively in a sentence. They describe nouns in the independent sentence. But now we're going to look at interrogatives as they function in nominal clauses, so that fill the noun slot in a sentence. Let's take a look at how these are different from that nominal clauses. So we said with the that nominal clause, functions nominally, okay? It takes the slot of a noun or a noun phrase in the sentence, and we can see it here. We also indicated that the that part is always at the beginning of the clause, and that if it were removed from the clause, we would have a complete sentence. So here our nominal clause is that the cat made a mess. If we drop that, we have the cat made a mess. That's an independent clause. So that's a feature of that nominal clauses, and that's what makes them different from interrogative nominal clauses. Here's an interrogative nominal clause. What the cat made is frustrating. So what the cat made is our dependent nominal clause. Now it is fronted with our interrogative, so we have what at the beginning instead of that. But we can see here that what is not supplementary to the clause. It is an integral part. It fills, in this case, the object slot. The cat made what? Or in other words, what the cat made. So we can't just delete it from the sentence like we could with the that clause. So that's one major difference between the that clause and the interrogative nominal clause. But both of them fill noun or noun phrase slots in the independent sentence. They could both be replaced with something or it. So let's look at some examples. Here's another one. Who won the game is obvious. So we have here a sentence, something is obvious, and the something is this dependent nominal clause, who won the game. And so who here is our interrogative. It's taking the subject slot within the clause. So who won the game is obvious. Here's another one. Okay, the dentist can see something. Okay, and the something is our nominal dependent clause. What is wrong? So again, here we have an interrogative that's taking a subject slot. What? Something is wrong. What is wrong? Okay. So this one here, something is new. And in this case, our interrogative is functioning in more adverbial sense. It's coming off of the noun there. We have where. So even though in the sentence, John works somewhere or someplace, that gets replaced with an interrogative, which is where, and then it's fronted at the beginning of the clause. So where John works is new. As we look at these examples, you should probably be thinking back to the relative clauses and remembering that that often happened in relative clauses, right? We would replace the missing information with an interrogative, and then we would take it and we would front it at the beginning of the sentence. But the difference with the relative clauses versus these nominal clauses is the relative clauses were connected to the sentence because they described a noun in the sentence. They were functioning adjectively. But with our nominal clauses, they are replacing the noun. And so as we can see here, we have a subject slot in the sentence, something is new, and this sentence is taking that whole slot, or this clause is taking that whole slot. So that's what the big difference between a nominal clause and an adjectival clause, like a relative clause, is that it's not just describing a noun, it is the noun or the noun phrase. Here's another example. The committee thought about how the candidate responded. So now we've got a nominal clause that is part of a prepositional phrase that comes off of what the committee thought, okay? And within it, we have the candidate responded in some way. And in some way, we can replace with how, and then we put that at the beginning of the clause, so how the candidate responded, and then we put that in the sentence in a noun slot, which is about something. So the committee thought about how the candidate responded. So we've got kind of two things happening here. We have to identify where it fits in the dependent sentence. It has to be in some kind of noun position. And then we figure out what's the missing piece of information that is replaced by the interrogative. Okay, and then that interrogative gets fronted at the beginning of the clause before it gets placed in the appropriate spot in the independent sentence. Let's talk a little bit about how sometimes phrases can be deleted from dependent clauses. We'll talk about one example, and then we'll also look at nominal clause examples. So an elliptical dependent clause. So an elliptical means this idea where something is referring back to something else. So if we look at this sentence here, this is more of a subordinate clause, okay? This is where it's functioning adverbially. When we talked about subordinating dependent clauses, this is the kind of sentence we could have seen. While the report was carefully written, the report was difficult to read. So both of our clauses are about the report. And because of that, we do have the ability to truncate or shrink the dependent clause. We could remove part of it, and it could become, while written carefully, the report was difficult to read. Because that dependent clause is talking about the same thing, we can put it right before it, but we could drop it. We can drop the subject. We can drop that verb there as well, okay? So while the report was written carefully, or while written carefully, the report was difficult to read. And you'll come across other situations where that you may be able to do that. You just need to make sure that when you do that, that the part you're removing actually refers to the subject in the independent clause. Sometimes what happens with writers is we get this thing called dangling modifiers, where we have this dependent clause like well written carefully, but then the subject that comes after is not the thing that was written carefully. I was reading a book to my sons the other night, and this happened, and I can't believe the editor and the author did not catch it. But it would be something like, well written carefully, I got a good mark on my essay. Okay, well, that next sentence, I got a good mark on my essay. The essay is the object, okay? I am the subject, and I am not written carefully. So this is a problem sometimes people have with these elliptical dependent clauses, is that they won't put the noun in it, but then they make the mistake that there's a disconnect between what is implied in that dependent clause and then what the subject of the following clause is. And if they're not the same, then you can't do that kind of deletion. This is one we talked about in class the other day. Keaton brought it up. We know that our teacher is an expert. Okay, we know something, and the something is our teacher is an expert. We can take our teacher as an expert, make it a nominal clause by adding that at the beginning, and then adding it into the noun slot, which is the something slot. We know that our teacher is an expert. And when we do this, we can delete the that. We've talked about this before. There are advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is it makes a shorter sentence. So we're using fewer words. It's less wordy. The disadvantage is that it doesn't clearly mark it as a nominal clause. And so we don't know where the dependent clause is sort of ending and where we're being set up now for this nominal clause. And so we have to use a little more cognitive processing to figure out we know something, and the something is our teacher is an expert. There is no right or wrong here. There's just different styles, but we need to be careful that we're making the choice that we think is best for our audience and that they will understand us. And if there's confusion, we may want to be more explicit. We may want to include more words that help signal things. So you just make the choices that you think are right for your style of writing and for your readers. So we reviewed interrogatives. We talked about how they serve different purposes in English grammar, WH questions, relative clauses, but they can also be used as a complementizer to start a nominal clause. We looked at examples and how they would be diagrammed. Okay? And then we talked about different ways that phrases could be deleted from dependent clauses, including the that in nominal clauses.